She found the music box in her grandmother's attic 3 days after the funeral. But when she opened it, the tiny ballerina wasn't alone. Tucked beneath the velvet lining was a letter addressed to someone she'd never heard of. Someone with her exact name. Someone who supposedly died 40 years ago. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her grandmother's. But the date on the letter made her hands shake. It was written just last week. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then the music finally brought you home. I've been waiting so long to tell you the truth about who you really are. Before we dive in, where in the world are you watching from right now? Type your country or city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, please hit subscribe. All right, back to the story. Sarah Martinez had always felt like she didn't quite fit. Not with her adoptive parents, who loved her fiercely, but never quite understood her obsession with old music and vintage things. Not with her friends, who couldn't grasp why she spent weekends exploring antique stores instead of clubs. And certainly not in the sprawling city, where she'd built a successful career as a sound engineer, surrounded by noise, but somehow always searching for silence. But standing in her grandmother Elena's attic, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, Sarah felt something she'd never experienced before. Recognition. As if the small, ornate music box with its chipped paint and worn velvet was calling to her across decades. Her grandmother had raised her from age 5 after her adoptive parents died in a car accident. Elena Martinez had been everything: mother, father, friend, and the keeper of all the family stories. Except, Sarah was beginning to realize, maybe not all of them. The tiny ballerina spun to a melody Sarah somehow knew by heart, though she was certain she'd never heard it before. And beneath that haunting tune, her fingers found the edge of something that didn't belong. The letter crinkled as she pulled it free, and her breath caught when she saw her own name written in her grandmother's careful script. But this wasn't just any letter. The paper was cream-colored and thick, the kind used for important occasions. The envelope bore a postmark from just 6 days ago, 2 days before her grandmother's heart attack. The return address was a place Sarah had never heard of, Millbrook, a small town 3 hours north. Her grandmother had never mentioned Millbrook. In all their years together, through countless conversations about family history and bedtime stories about the old country, Elena had never once spoken of this place. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. The words seemed to blur and sharpen, as if they were written in a language she was still learning to read. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then the music finally brought you home. I've been waiting so long to tell you the truth about who you really are. About why you hear melodies that haven't been played in 40 years. About why you search for something in every song, even though you don't know what you're looking for. You were never adopted, my darling girl. You were returned. Returned to the family that lost you when you were barely 2 years old. But the story they told you, about your parents dying in an accident, that was only half true. Your mother didn't die that day, Sarah. She's been looking for you ever since. The music box belonged to your real grandmother, my sister Rosa. She lived in Millbrook until the day she died, and she made me promise to keep it safe until you were ready to know the truth. The song it plays? That was your lullaby. The one your mother sang to you every night until the night you disappeared. I know this must be confusing, frightening even. But there are things you need to understand about our family. About why you can hear the stories that music tells. About why you've always felt like you were listening for something just beyond your reach. Go to Millbrook. Find the address on the back of this letter. Ask for Maria Santos, she's been waiting for you too. But Sarah, be careful who you trust. Not everyone in that town wants you to remember what happened 40 years ago. The music will guide you. It always has. All my love. Abuela Elena. P.S. Play the melody from the music box for Maria. She'll know you're really Elena's granddaughter then. Sarah read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, who had brushed her hair and taught her to make empanadas, and held her through every nightmare wasn't her grandmother at all. She was her great-aunt. And somewhere in a town called Millbrook lived a woman named Maria Santos who had been waiting 40 years for Sarah to come home. The music box continued its haunting melody, and for the first time in her life, Sarah understood why certain songs made her cry for reasons she couldn't name. Why she'd built a career around sound, but had never found the one song that would make her feel complete. She was about to discover that some melodies carry more than music. They carry memory. They carry loss. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they carry the path back home. As the sun set behind the mountains outside Elena's window, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would drive to Millbrook. She would find Maria Santos. And she would finally learn the truth about the night a 2-year-old girl vanished from her bed, leaving behind only the echo of a lullaby that had been searching for her ever since. What she didn't know was that in Millbrook, others were already preparing for her arrival. Some with joy, others with fear. Because Sarah's disappearance 40 years ago hadn't been an accident. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan to protect her from a family secret so dangerous that keeping her away had been the only way to keep her alive. But now she was coming home. And the music box that had waited patiently in Elena's attic would finally reveal why some songs are worth waiting a lifetime to hear. The ballerina spun one last time as Sarah closed the lid, but the melody lingered in the air long after the music stopped. In the growing darkness of the attic, surrounded by the remnants of a life she was only beginning to understand, Sarah felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, even if she had no idea what that meant yet. The drive to Millbrook should have taken 3 hours. Sarah had mapped it out carefully, printed directions despite having GPS, and left Elena's house at dawn to arrive before noon. But by the time she saw the weathered wooden sign welcoming visitors to Millbrook, population 847, founded in 1923, the sun was already casting long shadows across the mountain road. She'd stopped 4 times. Not for gas or food, but because every few miles, she'd heard the melody from the music box drifting through her car speakers, even though the radio was off. Each time, she'd pulled over, convinced there was some logical explanation. Some interference from a local station, or maybe her phone was somehow playing music she didn't remember downloading. But when she checked, there was only silence. Beautiful, complete silence that somehow felt more musical than any song she'd ever heard. The 4th time it happened, just as she crested a hill and saw the valley where Millbrook nestled between 2 mountain ranges, Sarah finally understood. The music wasn't coming from her car. It was coming from her. From someplace deep inside that had been quiet for 28 years and was finally beginning to remember how to sing. Millbrook looked like a town that time had gently forgotten. Victorian houses lined streets shaded by oak trees that must have been planted when the town was founded. A small main street featured the kind of businesses that belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting: Miller's General Store, Rosie's Diner, a bookshop called Chapter and Verse, and a music store with hand-painted signs advertising piano lessons and guitar repair. But it was the silence that struck Sarah most. Not the absence of sound, but the quality of it. In the city, silence was rare, and when it came, it felt empty. Here, the silence felt full, pregnant with stories and secrets and songs waiting to be discovered. She parked in front of Rosie's Diner and sat in her car for a long moment, watching people move through their daily routines. An elderly man swept the sidewalk in front of the bookstore with careful, methodical strokes. A woman with graying hair watered flowers in wooden boxes beneath the diner's windows. Children's laughter drifted from a playground she couldn't see. This was supposed to be home. This place she'd never seen, filled with people she'd never met, in a state she'd only driven through on her way to somewhere else. But as Sarah watched the afternoon light play across the storefronts, she felt something unfamiliar and wonderful. She felt like she belonged. The address on the back of Elena's letter led to a small house on Maple Street, just 2 blocks from the main drag. It was painted pale yellow with white trim, and the garden was the kind of organized chaos that spoke of someone who loved growing things but wasn't precious about perfection. Sunflowers towered over smaller plants, and a wind chime made of old keys tinkled softly in the breeze. Sarah stood at the gate for a full minute before she found the courage to walk up the path. What do you say to someone who's been waiting 40 years for you to come home? How do you introduce yourself to a woman who might be the key to understanding everything you've never understood about yourself? Before she could knock, the door opened. The woman standing in the doorway was perhaps 65, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and eyes the exact same shade of brown as Sarah's. She wore a flour-dusted apron over a blue dress, and her hands, paint-stained and gentle, flew to her mouth when she saw Sarah's face. "Mija," she whispered, and the word carried the weight of 4 decades. "You look just like her. Just like Elena when she was your age. Are you Maria Santos?" Sarah's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I am." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "And you're Sarah." "My Sarah." Elena's granddaughter. The little girl who loved music more than words. The recognition in Maria's voice was immediate and absolute. Not the recognition of meeting someone for the first time, but the deeper recognition of finding something that had been lost. "I don't understand any of this," Sarah said, and her honesty seemed to unlock something in Maria's expression. "I know, Mija. Come in. I've been making your favorite cookies all morning." "How do you know what my favorite cookies are?" Maria's smile was sad and beautiful, because they were your mama's favorite too. Snickerdoodles with extra cinnamon. Some things run in families, even when families are apart. Inside, Maria's house felt like a sanctuary. The walls were covered with photographs, families and celebrations, and everyday moments captured in time. But it was the music that made Sarah's breath catch. A piano dominated the living room, and sheet music covered every available surface. Some pages looked decades old, written in careful longhand. Others were newer, printed from computers, but worn from being played many times. "You're a musician," Sarah said. "I was a music teacher for 42 years, Maria replied, leading Sarah to a cozy kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. "Retired now, but I still give lessons to the children in town. Music keeps you young, you know. Keeps you connected to the parts of life that matter most." As Maria bustled around the kitchen, preparing tea and arranging cookies on a plate, Sarah found herself studying the woman's movements. There was something familiar in the way Maria hummed softly while she worked, in the gentle efficiency of her hands, in the way she seemed to move to a rhythm only she could hear. "Elena wrote that you've been waiting for me," Sarah said when they were seated at a small table by the window. "But I don't understand how you even knew I existed. Elena never mentioned Millbrook. Never mentioned you." Maria's expression grew complex. "Elena and I agreed it was safer that way. Safer for you, and safer for everyone who loved you. But now that she's gone." Maria paused, her voice catching. "Now it's time for you to know the truth about why you disappeared. And why bringing you back was the hardest thing your mama ever had to do." Sarah's heart began to race. "My mother. Elena said she's alive. That she's been looking for me. She never stopped looking, Mija. Even when we told her it was too dangerous. Even when we begged her to let sleeping dogs lie." Maria reached across the table and took Sarah's hands. "Your mama, she's like you. She hears things in music that other people can't hear. Stories, memories, sometimes even glimpses of things that haven't happened yet. That's impossible. Is it?" Maria's eyes were gentle but steady. "Haven't you always known when a song was telling the truth? Haven't you always been able to hear the stories hiding in melodies?" Sarah wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Every song she'd ever loved had felt like a conversation. Every piece of music she'd engineered had seemed to whisper secrets that had nothing to do with the lyrics or the instruments. "What happened to me when I was 2? Sarah asked. "Elena said I disappeared." Maria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. When she spoke, her voice was careful, as if the words themselves might be dangerous. Your mama brought you here when you were 18 months old. She was running from your father not because he was cruel, but because he was scared. Scared of what you might become. What you might be able to do with music. What I might be able to do. The women in your family, Mija, we don't just hear music. We can use it. To heal. To remember. To find what's been lost. Maria stood and walked to an old cabinet, returning with a wooden box similar to the music box Sarah had found in Elena's attic. Your great-great-grandmother could sing people's pain away. Your great-grandmother could help people remember things they'd forgotten. Your grandmother, your real grandmother, Rosa, she could find lost things with lullabies. Sarah's rational mind rebelled against what she was hearing, but something deeper recognized the truth in Maria's words. And my mother? Your mother could make people fall in love with music they'd never heard before. She could compose melodies that would change how people saw the world. Maria opened the wooden box, revealing old photographs and letters. But your father, he thought it was dangerous. Unnatural. When you started humming songs that hadn't been written yet, when you began crying every time someone played sad music, even if you were in another room and couldn't hear it clearly, he got frightened. Maria pulled out a photograph of a young woman holding a toddler. The woman had Sarah's eyes and Sarah's smile, and the child in her arms was unmistakably Sarah herself. So your mama brought you here to Rosa. This was always meant to be a safe place for women like us. But your father followed. And one night, when your mama was sleeping, he took you away. Sarah's hand shook as she took the photograph. But Elena said I was returned to family. That I wasn't really adopted. You were returned to Elena, Rosa's sister. But only after your father realized he couldn't silence what was inside you. He brought you to Elena when you were 5, after your adoptive parents died. He thought maybe Elena could help you be normal. Help you ignore the music. The pieces began falling into place. Elena's careful way of changing the subject whenever Sarah asked about her gift for hearing stories and songs. The way Elena had always steered Sarah toward practical careers, practical choices. The loving but persistent attempts to keep Sarah grounded in the ordinary world. Elena was trying to protect me. We all were, Mija. Because your mama never stopped looking. And there were others looking too. Others who wanted to use what you could do. Music is powerful, Sarah. In the right hands, it can heal. In the wrong hands. Maria trailed off. Where is she now? My mother. Maria's smile was mysterious and a little sad. Closer than you think. She's been living here in Millbrook for 20 years, waiting. Teaching music to children, just like I do. Hoping that someday the music would bring you home. Sarah's heart stopped. She's here? In this town. She works at the music store on Main Street. Morrison's Music. She goes by her maiden name now, Elena Rodriguez. Maria's eyes twinkled. You walked right past her this afternoon when you parked your car. What would you have done in her shoes? Sarah's mind reeled with the impossibility of it all. Her mother, alive, close enough to touch, living in a town where Sarah had felt instantly at home. Why didn't she come to Elena's funeral? Because she promised Elena she wouldn't contact you until you were ready. Until you came looking. Maria reached across the table again. Elena called her the night before she died. Told her it was time. That you were finally old enough, strong enough to handle the truth. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of piano music drifted through the open window. Someone was playing a melody Sarah had never heard, but somehow knew by heart. A lullaby that seemed to carry her name on every note. That's her, Maria whispered. That's your mama, playing your song. The song she wrote for you the day you were born. She plays it every evening at sunset, just in case you're close enough to hear it. Sarah stood without thinking, drawn to the window by a force stronger than curiosity. In the distance, she could see the music store, and through its large front window, the silhouette of a woman at a piano. The melody wrapped around Sarah's heart like an embrace she'd been waiting her whole life to receive. And for the first time since finding the music box in Elena's attic, Sarah understood what she'd been searching for in every song she'd ever loved. She'd been searching for the sound of home. Sarah stood outside Morrison's music for 20 minutes, watching her mother through the window. Elena Rodriguez, not the Elena who had raised her, but the Elena who had given birth to her, sat at an old upright piano, her fingers moving across the keys with the kind of fluid grace that comes from a lifetime of making music. She was smaller than Sarah had imagined, with dark hair streaked with silver and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of someone who had found joy even in the midst of heartbreak. But it was the way she played that made Sarah's chest tight with recognition. Her mother moved with music the same way Sarah did, as if the melodies were living things that required gentle handling, as if every note contained a story that deserved to be told with care. The lullaby drifted through the evening air, and Sarah finally understood why certain songs had always made her homesick for a place she'd never been. She'd been homesick for this moment, for the sound of her mother's hands on piano keys, playing a song written 28 years ago for a daughter who had been lost before she was old enough to remember the melody. When the song ended, Elena looked up from the piano and saw Sarah standing on the sidewalk. Their eyes met through the glass, and time seemed to fold in on itself. For a heartbeat, Sarah was 2 years old again, reaching for her mother's face. For a heartbeat, Elena was 25 again, singing her baby to sleep. Then Elena rose from the piano bench and walked to the door. Sarah. Her voice was exactly what Sarah had expected and nothing like she'd imagined. Warm like honey, strong like mountain wind, and full of music even when she was only speaking. Mom. The word felt strange and perfect on Sarah's tongue. They stood there for a moment, two women separated by 4 decades and only a few feet of sidewalk, each afraid that moving too quickly might make the other disappear. Then Elena smiled, a smile so bright it could have powered the streetlights, and opened her arms. Sarah had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways since leaving Maria's house. She'd pictured awkward conversations and tentative handshakes and the careful politeness of strangers getting to know each other. She hadn't expected the instant recognition, the way her body seemed to remember being held by these arms even though her mind had no memory of it. She hadn't expected to feel like she was 5 years old and 28 years old and ageless all at once. Elena held her daughter and cried the kind of tears that come from a place deeper than sadness or joy, tears that come from finding something you never thought you'd see again. I knew you'd come, Elena whispered into Sarah's hair. The music told me you were close. It's been singing differently all week, like it was getting ready to welcome you home. Maria told me about what happened, about why I was taken away. Elena pulled back to look at Sarah's face, her hands still gentle on her daughter's shoulders. Are you angry? At me for letting you go? At Elena for keeping the secret? Sarah considered the question seriously. Was she angry? She'd lost 23 years with her mother. She'd grown up feeling like something essential was missing without ever knowing what. She'd built a life around sound and music and stories, never understanding that she was trying to find her way back to the first song she'd ever heard. But looking at Elena's face, at the love and hope and terror written there, Sarah realized that anger was the wrong word entirely. I'm grateful, she said, and meant it. I'm grateful that you all loved me enough to keep me safe. Even when it cost you everything. Elena's smile was radiant. You sound like Elena. Like my sister-in-law. She always said that love isn't about holding on to people. It's about making sure they're safe to become who they're meant to be. Can I hear it again? The lullaby. Of course, Mija. Come inside. Morrison's music was exactly the kind of place Sarah had dreamed of owning someday. Guitars hung from the walls like art, and sheet music was organized in wooden cubbies that looked like they'd been built by someone who understood that music needed to be both accessible and treasured. A small concert area in the back featured mismatched chairs arranged around a baby grand piano that gleamed under soft lighting. But it was the walls that made Sarah catch her breath. They were covered in photographs of children, hundreds of them, spanning decades. Children holding instruments, children performing in recitals, children laughing during lessons. Every student I've taught in the last 20 years, Elena explained, following Sarah's gaze. Music connects us all, you know. Every song we share becomes part of who we are. Elena sat at the piano again and began to play, but this time Sarah was close enough to see her mother's face as the melody unfolded. She watched Elena's expressions change with each phrase, saw the way certain notes made her smile and others made her eyes grow distant with memory. "What is it about music?" Sarah asked when the song ended. "What makes it different for us than for other people?" "I think," Elena said thoughtfully, "that most people hear music as decoration, as something that makes life prettier or more interesting. But we hear it as language, as a way the universe talks to itself." Sarah nodded. "I've never been able to explain it to anyone. The way songs have personalities. The way melodies carry more information than just notes." "That's because they do." Elena turned to face her daughter fully. "Music is memory, Sarah. Every song that's ever been written carries the emotional truth of the moment it was created. Most people hear the surface, the rhythm, the harmony, the lyrics. We hear the story underneath." "But Maria said you could do more than just hear music." "She said you could use it." Elena's expression grew careful. "What did she tell you?" "That you could make people fall in love with music they'd never heard before. That the women in our family could heal with songs, find lost things with lullabies." "And what do you think about that?" Sarah hesitated. 24 hours ago, she would have said it was impossible. But 24 hours ago, she hadn't known that her entire life story was different than she'd believed. She hadn't known that coming home could feel like remembering how to breathe. "I think," she said slowly, "that I've always known there was something different about the way I experience music. I just didn't have words for it." Elena nodded. "Your great-great-grandmother, Esperanza, she lived in a time when people understood that music was medicine. When they knew that the right song could mend a broken heart or help someone remember who they used to be before life wore them down. And now? Now most people think music is entertainment. But some of us still remember the old ways." Elena played a few soft chords, and Sarah felt something shift in the air around them. "Would you like me to show you? Have you ever felt something like this? Tell me your story." Sarah's heart raced with anticipation and fear. "Show me what?" "What you can do. What you've always been able to do, even if you didn't realize it." Elena began to play a melody Sarah had never heard, but as the notes filled the air, images began to form in Sarah's mind. Not visions exactly, but impressions. The feeling of rain on summer afternoons. The sound of children laughing in a schoolyard. The specific quality of light that comes just before sunset in autumn. "What am I seeing?" Sarah whispered. "The memories that live in the song. I wrote it 5 years ago during the first week of school. I was teaching a little girl named Amy who was afraid to sing in front of other people. This melody helped her find her voice." As Elena continued to play, Sarah could almost see Amy, a girl with braids and serious eyes who transformed when she sang. She could feel the pride and joy and gentle encouragement that Elena had woven into every measure. "This is what you do? You put memories into music." "Sometimes. When someone needs to remember something they've forgotten about themselves. When they need to be reminded that they're braver or kinder or more talented than they believe." Elena transitioned into another melody, and this one hit Sarah like a physical force. Suddenly she was small again, maybe 3 or 4 years old, sitting in a sunny kitchen while someone, Elena, her mother, sang while making breakfast. The love in that memory was so intense it made Sarah dizzy. "That one's yours," Elena said softly. "From before you were taken away. I put it in this song so I wouldn't forget how it felt to make music for you every morning." Sarah was crying without realizing it. "I remember this. Not the specific moment, but the feeling. I've been chasing this feeling my entire life." "Music remembers even when we can't," Elena said. "It holds on to the things that matter most, keeps them safe until we're ready to have them back." They spent the next hour exploring Sarah's musical inheritance, Elena played songs that revealed memories Sarah didn't know she had, melodies that seemed to unlock rooms in her heart that had been closed for decades. With each song, Sarah understood more about who she was and where she came from. But it was the last song that changed everything. This one, Elena said, her hands hovering over the keys. I wrote for you last week. After Elena called to tell me you were finally ready to come home. The melody that filled the music store was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. It moved through the air like light through water, creating patterns that shifted and changed even as Sarah listened. And as the music washed over her, Sarah felt something inside herself respond. Without thinking, she began to hum along. Not the melody Elena was playing, but a harmony that seemed to emerge from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. The two melodies wove together, creating something more complex and beautiful than either could have achieved alone. Sarah, Elena breathed, her hands stilling on the keys. That harmony. I've never heard it before, but it's perfect. It's exactly what the song needed. I don't know where it came from. It just felt right. Elena's eyes were shining. That's your gift, Mija. You don't just hear the stories and music, you can complete them. You can find the missing pieces that make songs whole. As the last notes faded in the evening air, Sarah felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not just understanding, but belonging. For the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was supposed to be. But their moment of discovery was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk outside. Elena's expression changed, becoming watchful and tense. What is it? Sarah asked. Someone's coming. Someone who's been waiting for you to surface. Elena moved quickly to the window, her movements suddenly urgent. Sarah, there are things I haven't told you yet. About why your father was really afraid. About why we've had to be so careful all these years. The footsteps stopped outside the music store, and a shadow fell across the window. What things? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. There are others like us, Mija. But not all of them use music to heal. Some use it to harm. And they've been looking for you for a very long time. A knock echoed through the store, polite but persistent. Elena moved protectively in front of her daughter. Whatever happens, Sarah, remember this. Music is always stronger than fear. And love is always stronger than both. The knock came again, and Sarah realized that finding her mother was only the beginning of her story. The real test was about to begin. The man who entered Morrison's music looked like he could have been anyone's uncle, soft around the middle, wearing a cardigan that had seen better years, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. But the moment he stepped into the store, every instrument seemed to hold its breath. Elena, he said, and his voice carried the weight of old familiarity. It's been a long time. Sarah's mother stepped protectively in front of her daughter, but her posture was more resigned than surprised. Hello, David. I wondered when you'd show up. Sarah felt her world tilt. David? Dad? The man's eyes found hers, and Sarah saw her own features reflected in his face, the same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting his head when thinking. But where her eyes held music, his held something she couldn't quite name. Not cruelty, but a kind of careful emptiness. Hello, Sarah. You've grown up beautiful, just like your mother. You're my father. It wasn't a question. I am. And I'm here because it's time you understood why I had to take you away from all this. He gestured around the music store, and somehow his casual movement made the guitars on the walls seem less bright, the piano less inviting. Elena moved closer to Sarah. She doesn't need to hear this from you, David. I can tell her. Can you? David's voice remained gentle, but something sharp flickered beneath it. Can you tell her about Mrs. Patterson? Sarah felt her mother go still. Who's Mrs. Patterson? A woman Elena helped when you were 18 months old, David continued, settling into one of the chairs as if he had all the time in the world. Mrs. Patterson had been grieving her son for 3 years. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. So Elena, in her infinite compassion, wrote her a song that would help her let go of her pain. That sounds like a good thing, Sarah said, though something in David's tone made her uneasy. It was. Mrs. Patterson listened to Elena's song, and for the first time in 3 years, she smiled. She laughed. She started living again. David's eyes never left Sarah's face. She was so grateful that she wanted to do something special for Elena. Something to show her appreciation. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. David, don't. So Mrs. Patterson wrote Elena a check. A very large check. And then she went home and took every pill in her medicine cabinet. Sarah's stomach dropped. What? The song didn't just help her let go of her pain, you see. It helped her let go of everything, including her will to live. David leaned forward slightly. That's the thing about music that can change how people feel, Sarah. It doesn't always change them in the ways you intend. That's not what happened, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Patterson's suicide wasn't because of the song. It was coincidence. Was it? What about Mr. Garcia then? The song you wrote to help him remember his late wife? He remembered her so vividly that he started talking to her at the dinner table, started setting a place for her every night. His family had to have him committed. Sarah looked at her mother, searching for denial, for explanation. But Elena's face was pale and stricken. Or little Tommy Morrison, David continued relentlessly. The boy you helped find his confidence with music? He found so much confidence that he tried to fly off his garage roof because your song made him believe he could do anything. Stop, Elena whispered. I'm not saying this to be cruel, Elena. I'm saying this because Sarah deserves to know the truth about what our family's gift can do. About what she could do if she's not careful. Sarah sank into one of the chairs, her mind reeling. Are you saying that helping people with music is dangerous? I'm saying that power without wisdom is dangerous. And music, real music, the kind you and your mother can create, is one of the most powerful forces in the world. David's voice grew gentler, more paternal. When you were a baby, Sarah, you would hum songs that made everyone in the room feel whatever you were feeling. If you were happy, we couldn't help but smile. If you were sad, grown adults would start crying without knowing why. Sarah remembered her childhood, the way Elena had always seemed worried when Sarah got too excited about a particular song, too invested in the stories she heard in melodies. Aunt Elena was trying to protect me from this? Elena was trying to protect everyone from this, David corrected. Because she understood what your mother refused to accept. That some gifts are too dangerous to use. Elena finally found her voice. That's not true, Sarah. Yes, there have been complications. Times when the music affected people in ways I didn't expect. But that doesn't mean we should abandon our gifts entirely, doesn't it? David stood, and as he moved, Sarah noticed something she'd missed before. The man cast no reflection in the store's mirrors. The guitars on the wall seemed to lean away from him as he passed. Tell her about the children, Elena. What children? Sarah's voice was sharp with growing fear. Elena's hands clenched into fists. David, you promised. I promised to leave you both alone if you never used your abilities again. But here you are, teaching Sarah, showing her what she can do. The promise is broken. David's mild expression never changed, but the air in the store grew colder. There are 12 children in this town, Sarah. 12 children your mother has been teaching music to for the past 5 years. And every one of them is starting to show abilities like yours. Sarah felt her breath catch. That's impossible. Is it? Haven't you noticed how quickly you picked up that harmony tonight? How natural it felt. David moved closer, and with each step, the instruments around them seemed to grow quieter, as if their voices were being slowly stolen. Musical ability can be transferred, Sarah. Enhanced. Awakened. Your mother has been creating others like you. That's not what I was doing, Elena protested, but doubt crept into her voice. I was just teaching them to love music. You were teaching them to hear what you hear, to feel what you feel, to do what you do. David's voice remained patient, almost kind. And now there are 12 children in this town who can make their parents cry just by humming. 12 children who know things they shouldn't know, remember things that never happened to them, see things that haven't occurred yet. Sarah thought about the photographs covering the walls of the music store. All those smiling children, spanning decades. How many of them had Elena influenced without meaning to? Why does that matter? Sarah demanded. So, what if there are others like us? David smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw something genuinely frightening in his expression. Because we're not the only ones who know about your family's gifts, Sarah. There are organizations, government agencies, private corporations, wealthy individuals who would pay anything to control people who can manipulate emotions through music. Who can implant memories, alter personalities, change the very fabric of who someone is. The temperature in the store dropped another degree. Elena moved protectively closer to Sarah. They've been watching, waiting for someone powerful enough to be worth the risk of exposure. And now, thanks to your mother's teaching, there's an entire town full of potential assets. Sarah's mind raced. You're saying that by teaching children music, my mother put them in danger? I'm saying that by awakening their abilities, she painted targets on their backs. And on yours. David's expression grew genuinely sad. I took you away 26 years ago to prevent exactly this scenario. To keep you safe from people who would use you. By keeping me from who I really am? By keeping you alive. The silence that followed was broken by a new sound: engines outside. Multiple vehicles pulling up to the store. Elena ran to the window and went pale. They're here, she whispered. David, what did you do? What I had to do. What I've been trying to avoid for almost 3 decades. David's voice carried genuine regret. I called them, Elena. I told them about Sarah, about the children, about what you've been doing here. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. You called who? The Harmony Institute. They're a research organization that studies people with musical abilities. They'll take good care of you, Sarah. They'll help you understand your gifts, learn to control them safely. They'll cage us, Elena said flatly. They'll study us like lab rats and use what they learn to create weapons. Men in dark suits were getting out of black SUVs, their movements efficient and coordinated. Sarah counted at least 8 of them, and more vehicles were arriving. I won't let that happen, Sarah said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. David looked at her with something that might have been pride. And how exactly do you plan to stop them, sweetheart? You don't even know what you're capable of yet. Sarah looked around the music store, at the guitars and violins and sheet music, at the piano where her mother had played her lullaby, at the photographs of all the children who might now be in danger because of her family's gift. Then she looked at her mother, who was watching her with a mixture of terror and hope. Maybe it's time I found out. Sarah walked to the piano and sat down. She'd never had formal training, but her hands seemed to know where to go. As her fingers touched the keys, she felt something electric run through her, not just the music, but the accumulated musical energy of everyone who had ever played in this store, everyone who had ever sung these songs, everyone who had ever found healing in these melodies. Sarah, don't, David warned. You don't understand the consequences. But Sarah was already playing. Not a melody she'd learned or heard before, but something that seemed to rise from the very foundation of the building, from the earth beneath Millbrook, from the collective musical memory of every person who had ever called this place home. The sound that filled the store was impossible. It was every lullaby ever sung, every love song ever written, every funeral dirge and wedding march and children's rhyme woven together into something that transcended individual melodies. It was the sound of human emotion given voice, of memory made manifest, of love transformed into pure energy. Outside, the men in suits stopped moving. Some of them began to smile. Others started to cry. One of them sat down on the sidewalk and began laughing with joy. What are you doing? David's voice was strained, as if the music was affecting him too despite his apparent immunity. I'm reminding them who they used to be, Sarah said without stopping her playing. Before they forgot that music is supposed to heal, not harm. The melody grew stronger, pulling in harmony from the other instruments in the store. Guitars began resonating on their own, violins hummed in sympathy, and even the old drums in the corner started keeping time with Sarah's heartbeat. Through the window, Sarah could see the effects spreading beyond the men outside. Lights were coming on in houses throughout Millbrook as people woke to the sound. But they weren't waking in fear, they were waking in wonder, drawn by music that spoke directly to their souls. Can you imagine hearing that from someone you trust? The melody Sarah played carried every positive musical memory from every person in town. Every Christmas carol, every birthday song, every dance at a wedding, every gentle tune hummed to soothe a crying child. It was the soundtrack of a community's love for itself, amplified and reflected back through Sarah's newfound understanding of what her gift could do. "This is why they want us," Elena said, her voice filled with awe. "Not because we can manipulate people, but because we can remind them of who they really are underneath all the fear and anger and pain." David backed toward the door, his face a mask of confusion and growing panic. "Sarah, you have to stop. You don't understand what you're unleashing." But Sarah was beginning to understand exactly what she was unleashing. As her music spread through Millbrook, she could feel the barriers people had built around their hearts beginning to dissolve. She could sense neighbors remembering why they loved each other, parents remembering the wonder they'd felt when their children were born, children remembering that the world was full of magic if you knew how to listen for it. The men outside weren't advancing anymore. They were standing in the street, looking around as if seeing the town for the first time. Some of them were talking on their phones, but their voices carried confusion rather than command. "You're not controlling them," Elena realized. "You're freeing them." From what? From forgetting what music is really for. As Sarah played, she began to understand the true scope of her family's gift. It wasn't about manipulating emotions or implanting memories. It was about awakening the music that already lived inside every human heart, the rhythm of compassion, the melody of connection, the harmony of understanding that bound all people together regardless of their differences. The song she was playing had no beginning and no end. It was the song that had been playing since the first human being hummed a tune to comfort a crying child, and it would continue playing long after the last person on earth drew breath. Sarah wasn't creating it so much as channeling it, giving voice to the musical thread that connected every soul who had ever lived. Outside, more people were emerging from their houses. Not the children Elena had taught they were safely asleep, protected by their innocence, but their parents, their grandparents, their neighbors. The entire town was gathering in the street, drawn by music that reminded them of every moment they had ever felt truly alive. And in that moment, Sarah knew exactly what she had to do to keep her family, her real family, which included every person who had ever been touched by healing music, safe from those who would use their gifts for harm. She had to make sure that everyone remembered what music was really for. The music that flowed from Sarah's fingers that night in Morrison's music became the kind of story people would tell their grandchildren. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was true in a way that reached past logic and spoke directly to the part of the human heart that remembers what it felt like to be completely, unconditionally loved. By dawn, the entire town of Millbrook had gathered on Main Street. They came carrying instruments, guitars pulled from closets, harmonicas found in junk drawers, childhood recorders that still worked despite decades of neglect. Mrs. Chin brought her violin. The Martinez family carried a full drum set from their garage. Even old Mr. Peterson, who claimed to be tone-deaf, showed up with a cowbell he'd been saving for special occasions. They weren't following orders or responding to some supernatural compulsion. They came because Sarah's music had reminded them of something they'd forgotten, that they were part of something larger than themselves, connected to every other person who had ever found comfort in a melody. The men from the Harmony Institute stood among them, no longer looking like operatives, but like people who had suddenly remembered their own names. Some of them were crying. Others were laughing. A few had called their supervisors to explain that they couldn't complete their mission because they'd remembered why they'd become interested in music in the first place, not to weaponize it, but to understand the magic that happened when human beings made beautiful sounds together. Sarah played for 6 hours straight, never repeating a melody, but somehow never stopping the song. Elena stood beside the piano, occasionally adding her voice in harmonies that made the music even more powerful. Maria arrived just after midnight, carrying a tambourine and a smile that could have lit up the valley. But it was the children who made the moment truly magical. Despite their parents' attempts to keep them sleeping safely in their beds, the 12 children Elena had taught over the past 5 years began appearing on Main Street around 3 in the morning. They came quietly, drawn by music that spoke their language, and they brought instruments of their own. 8-year-old Amy, the girl who had been afraid to sing, stood in the center of the crowd and began a song that seemed to rise from the earth itself. 10-year-old Marcus joined her on his guitar, playing melodies that painted pictures in the air. Little Sophia, barely 6, hummed harmonies that made the stars seem brighter. As each child added their voice to the growing symphony, Sarah realized that her mother hadn't been creating musicians like herself. She'd been awakening something that was already there, the natural human capacity for making music that heals rather than harms, that connects rather than divides. "This is what they're afraid of," Elena said, leaning close to Sarah's ear as the town continued their impromptu concert. "Not that we can control people through music, but that we can remind them they don't need to be controlled at all." David had disappeared sometime during the night, slipping away when he realized that his plan to protect his daughter by surrendering her had backfired completely. The Harmony Institute agents were calling their headquarters, but not to report a successful capture. They were requesting permission to study the phenomenon they'd witnessed, not the people creating the music, but the music itself, and what it revealed about human nature when people felt truly safe to be themselves. By the time the sun rose over Millbrook, something fundamental had shifted in the small town. Not just because of Sarah's music, but because of what happened when an entire community remembered how to listen to each other. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, who had been visiting for the first time since her mother's suicide 5 years earlier, stood in the crowd holding hands with Elena. She'd driven to Millbrook planning to confront the woman whose song had failed to save her mother, but somewhere in the night's music, she'd heard something that changed her understanding of what had happened. "My mother was in pain for so long," she told Elena as the dawn light painted the mountains gold. "Your song didn't cause her death. It gave her one last night of peace. That's more than any medicine could do." Mr. Garcia was there too, no longer talking to his late wife, but talking about her, sharing stories of their life together with neighbors who listened with genuine interest. The music had helped him understand the difference between holding on to someone and holding on to love. Tommy Morrison, now 13 and safely earthbound, had brought his trumpet. He played Amazing Grace as the sun crested the mountains, and the melody carried all the hope and forgiveness and second chances that the hymn was meant to hold. "What happens now?" Sarah asked her mother as the crowd began to disperse, people heading home to make breakfast and call in late to work and try to explain to distant relatives why they felt like the world had somehow become a kinder place overnight. "Now we keep doing what we've always done," Elena replied. "We teach. We heal. We help people remember who they are when they're not afraid." "And the Harmony Institute?" Elena smiled. "I think they're going to discover that the best way to study musical healing is to participate in it. Several of their agents have already asked if they can enroll their children in music lessons." Sarah laughed, the sound bright and clear in the morning air. "So we're starting a school? We're continuing a tradition that's older than written music. Teaching people that they already know how to sing, they just need permission to remember." As the last of the townspeople headed home, Sarah found herself alone with her mother in the music store. The instruments on the walls seemed to hum with residual energy from the night's performance, and sheet music scattered by the crowd's movement told the story of a community that had rediscovered its voice. "There's something I need to ask you," Sarah said. "About Elena, about my aunt. Did she know this would happen? When she sent me that letter, did she know I'd end up here, doing this?" Elena considered the question carefully. I think Elena knew that music always finds a way. That songs want to be shared, that healing wants to happen, that love wants to grow. She paused, running her fingers over the piano keys. I think she trusted that if you ever found your way back to music, real music, the kind that matters, you'd use it the way it was meant to be used. To bring people together. To remind people that they were never really apart. Sarah sat beside her mother on the piano bench, and together they played the lullaby that had started everything. But now it wasn't just a song for a lost child. It was a song for everyone who had ever felt lost and found their way home through music. If you saw that twist coming, type truth in the comments. As they played, Sarah realized that her story wasn't ending in Millbrook. It was beginning. The night's music had awakened something in the town, but more importantly, it had awakened something in the people who had witnessed it. They would carry that music with them wherever they went, sharing it with others who needed to remember what it felt like to be part of something beautiful. The Harmony Institute agents would return to their organization with a new understanding of what musical healing could accomplish. Some would resign to pursue music therapy degrees. Others would work to transform their institution from the inside, turning it into a research center focused on the therapeutic applications of community music making. The children Elena had taught would grow up knowing that their voices mattered, that their songs could change the world one heart at a time. They would become teachers and healers and artists who understood that the most powerful music isn't performed for audiences, it's created with them. And in small towns and big cities across the country, people who had heard recordings of that night's music, captured on cell phones and shared through social media, would begin gathering in their own communities to rediscover what happened when people made music together without worrying about perfection or performance. Sarah and Elena played until the afternoon, their music drifting through Millbrook's open windows and mixing with the sounds of normal life returning to the town. Children playing in yards. Adults calling to each other across garden fences. The gentle rhythm of a community that had remembered how to sing. As the final notes of the lullaby faded, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion. Not because her story was over, but because she finally understood what it was about. It had never been about finding her family. It had been about learning that family isn't just the people who share your blood or your home. Family is everyone who recognizes the same song in your heart, everyone who understands that music is love made audible, everyone who knows that the most important harmony is the one that reminds us we're all part of the same human symphony. Ready to go home? Elena asked. Sarah looked around the music store that had become the center of the most important night of her life. Then she looked at her mother, the woman who had given her life twice, once through birth and once through teaching her what that life was for. I am home, she said. And in the distance, carried on the mountain wind that had been singing over Millbrook for generations, Sarah could hear the echo of music that would never end. Music that connected every heart that had ever loved, every voice that had ever offered comfort, every soul that had ever understood that the most beautiful songs are the ones we sing together. The ballerina in Elena's music box might have stopped dancing, but the melody it had played would continue forever, passed from mother to daughter, from teacher to student, from heart to heart, reminding everyone who heard it that some songs are worth waiting a lifetime to sing. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully, you can still hear it playing in the quiet moments between other sounds, calling lost souls home to the music that was always waiting inside them. Because some songs never end. They just wait for the next person brave enough to play them.